Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about the scientific revolution, what that means, and why it's so important. So let's go ahead and just jump right in. Okay, so basically, what the scientific revolution is it was a movement that encouraged people to be innovative and just seek knowledge. So, this is a time when everybody is questioning the things around them. So, nothing was assumed. So, think about like babies, not babies, but like toddlers, and how they're always questioning everything and they why. So this is a time when that why question was instrumental. It was a driving force. People wanted to figure out why things were happening the way that they were and to really put some answers to those questions and figure out why things work, why they do certain things, and so on and so forth. So basically, finding answers to those questions of the unknown. So detecting the great unknown. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the logic behind it. So I'm sure you have heard about scientific process, scientific reasoning, and of course, logic is using your mind and science to determine answers. So not only do you find things by doing scientific experiments, but sometimes you have to use logic as well to really understand what's going on. Common sense is huge, right? So, how did people come up with these answers? So, magical thought. So, before they would say, oh, a witch did it. It's magic. It just happened. A witch must have done that, right? And then you have your religious thought. So, people would say, well, God did it. And then finally, you're getting to see that different perspective, that scientific thought. So, people are using logic and saying, oh, well, the apple fell from the tree not because a witch dropped it down, not because God decided to make it fall, but because the limb was a little bit weak, the apple got too big and it fell down. So they did that is through the scientific method. So they would come up with these, they would view something, observe something, and try to figure out why it was happening. So they would provide that hypothesis, which is an unproven question. Okay, so they would use the scientific method to prove their hypothesis. So if you see that all dogs have four legs, Rover is a dog. So what would your conclusion be? Rover has four legs. So you see different things, you're noticing different things, and you kind of begin to put them together to get that final thought and those answers to those questions that you have. So I'm sure you talked about this plenty in science. You have your scientific method. You start with the hypothesis and work all the way down to the conclusion to get that answer. And this is exactly what people were doing during that time to get answers to those questions that we didn't know. Okay, so you have your theory, of course, that is your observation of something. So you see something in nature and you try to say, hey, I theorized, I feel like that means this. Okay, so, but you want to be able to prove yourself right or wrong, and so you're going to form your hypothesis. So you're coming up with a question about your observation. Okay, then you conduct plenty of different experiments and tests to determine whether it's right or wrong, and then you confirm that with your data. Okay, so you confirm whether or not what you said was true. You always got to back up yourself, okay? You got to have the receipts. Got to have your receipts, okay? All right, so you have inductive reasoning. So that's observing something specific and using it to make a general statement. So that can be kind of dangerous, especially when we're talking about history, right? Because you can't see one person and make a huge general statement based on just a couple of people. That just wouldn't work. So we're going to talk about that as we go on throughout the time of history. But here's another example. So John came to class late this morning. John's hair was uncombed. Previous experience is that John is very fussy about his hair. So our conclusion is John must have overslept. So you're seeing these different things, you're observing all of these different moments, and then you put them together to form that final thought. Okay, reasons why this is important. So Renaissance, we talked about, was an emphasis on questioning things, on finding the answers, and finding your true potential, right? Your human ability. It's a rebirth. So we see that there's an emphasis on order and perfection. It's okay to question traditional beliefs because sometimes they might not be all the way true, right? So you think about all the time, think about when your parents say something and then you're like, I don't know about that. So you want to go and question it. And that's a really important thing, is you should always question things to figure out what is right and what's wrong. We also started to believe that humans can do anything. We have the ability to literally do whatever, but we have to back it up. We've got to get there and come up with that plan. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit more about the Reformation next week, but the Catholic Church was not a fan of science, because sometimes science goes against Christianity, and they were not a fan of that. So we're going to talk about that next week and how those bled into each other and led to a lot of issues. And it also led to the church becoming less significant, because we talked about how the church was so important, and sometimes that led to the church having too much power when we're talking about some of the people that were corrupt, those corrupt officials. And so they're starting to kind of weaken their authority as time goes on and people start to question things. Okay, we also talked about overseas exploration. People are needing to use those scientific methods to figure out what these plants are, what they do. It's the same thing with animals. Okay, we're going to skip over this. All right, so let's talk a little bit about William Harvey first. So Mr. Harvey was an English doctor and a teacher. He was the first to correctly describe and prove that blood circulates through the body and it's pumped by the heart. So he is the first person to realize that the heart is this muscle, and it basically is responsible for getting blood everywhere. Okay, so he provided important findings on how the body works. So because of him, we were able to figure out that the heart really is important, because sometimes they didn't really realize that, and that the heart is, the job is to pump blood throughout the body. Okay, so we have Andreas Vesalius. Okay, so this is another person that has to do with the human body and anatomy. So this is something, he really brought this innovation for the first time in more than 1,500 years. People just didn't really question the body and question those things. In fact, they didn't even see the brain as important. So he really brought that to us, right? So he determined that scientific knowledge is found by observing nature, not by reading books. So if you go read a book, what if the person before you that wrote that book was wrong? Or what if they knew the answer and they wanted to lie to you? Because we know that that happens, right? Some people don't necessarily tell the truth. A lot of people want clout, right? So he said the only way to find the truth is to really go out there and observe it yourself. You've got to do it yourself to find the answers, because you're not going to lie to you, right? Inevitably, you shouldn't be lying to yourself. And that's the only way that you find things. You've got to see it to believe it. So he recorded the first collection of scientific observations since ancient times, and he marked the beginning of modern science. Okay, human anatomy is very important. All right, Nicolaus Copernicus. He was the founder of modern astronomy. So he introduced this heliocentric method and basically said that Earth is one of many heavenly bodies. They spin on an axis and revolve around the sun. So the sun doesn't move. Before they thought the sun moved, but he said, doesn't sound about right. I think the sun stays there and these other planets move around the sun. Okay, so this completely revolutionized Europe's concept of what the universe is and what that means. And what's extremely important about Copernicus is that he influenced Galileo, Kepler, and Newton, who were huge in the world of science later on. Here's a picture of Mr. Galileo Galilei himself. He is considered one of the most influential scientists in history. He created the law of inertia, invented the telescope, and had plenty of astronomy observations. Okay, he was able to really kind of perfect the scientific method, and through his work of developing these inventions and figuring out why things do what they do. Okay, so you need quantitative measurements is what he was saying. You have to be very careful and make sure that you have a bunch of different measurements in order to determine that your information is accurate. Okay, here is Sir Isaac Newton. He is considered the greatest and most influential scientist of the era. Of course, you've probably heard the story of the apple falling on his head. So he had these major contributions to understanding motion, light, and heat. He discovered the theory of gravity as a force that pulls objects toward Earth and created calculus. So you can thank him if you have to take calculus senior year. Okay, so it's known that he sat under this tree, an apple fell on his head, and he was like, ouch, whoa, why did that fall? Okay, must be gravity. I'm sure you've heard that story. All right, Johannes Kepler. He was also an astronomer and a mathematician, and sometimes you see that the two bleed into each other. Science and math kind of go hand in hand. And he mathematically proved that Copernicus's theory about planetary movements was accurate. Okay, he realized that planets move in an ellipses, right? So an ellipses goes this way. And they do not always travel at the same speed around the sun. So some are faster, some are slower based on their position. All right, René Descartes. He was a philosopher and mathematician who believed truth is found only in logic. So you get all this information and you have to be able to rule things out as right or wrong and come up with that final solution. Okay, so the only way that you're able to do that is to question absolutely everything. Okay, he didn't trust anything that he read, and so he proved that it was true. So he had this famous quote, "I think, therefore I am," because he questioned everything and had to actually find it out for himself. All right, so in conclusion, these are some questions that you can use to go back through and make sure that you completely understand the material and you understand the importance of the scientific movement. All right, make sure that you got those notes copied down. See y'all later.